Hi, everybody. My name is Rachel, and I'll be presenting to you all today how diet may be able to help us prevent Alzheimer's disease. So, for a little bit of background, for those who don't know, Alzheimer's disease is a progressive degenerative disease that causes memory loss and cognitive impairment. It is the seventh leading cause of death in the United States, and that number is growing quickly. It's just not a good disease to have, and those who know someone that's had it is just not a way to live, and we are trying our best to do everything to prevent it from happening. So one way that we may be able to prevent it is through our diet. So the diet that I'll be presenting today about is the Mediterranean diet. It reflects the dietary habits and lifestyle of those who live in the Mediterranean. Um, it emphasizes plant-based foods and healthy fats. They include lots of whole grains, legumes, fish, vegetables, fruits, olive oil, and nuts, with moderate amounts of red wine, which many people may enjoy, cheese and yogurt, and fish. And they have limited amounts of sweets and sugary beverages, butter, and red meat. And they also get a lot more daily exercise than those of us in the Western culture. So here's a little bit of background about what we already know. In 2012, an Australian study was conducted, and they found that there was lower adherence to the Mediterranean diet, that there was higher instances of myocardial infarction and instances of Alzheimer's disease. And vice versa, on the other side, they found that higher adherence to the Mediterranean diet is associated with lower instances of myocardial infarction and Alzheimer's disease. And those results were found to be statistically significant at the p is less than 0.05 standard. This study measured cognitive impairment with a test that the participants completed that overall just gave an idea of their cognitive impairment, and they measured their diet with food frequency questionnaires. And from the data they found on both ends, they were able to come to those conclusions with statistical significance. And then a study in 2010 found that better adherence to the Mediterranean diet was associated with a lower risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. And they came to the conclusion that greater adherence to the Mediterranean diet may have a 34% lower chance of developing Alzheimer's disease in those participants. And at that significance, it was 0.04. So both studies were statistically significant and point in the direction that Alzheimer's may be prevented, or the numbers may be lowered by those who have greater adherence to the Mediterranean diet. So for the methods of my study, is a little bit different than the studies mentioned before. Those studies were conducted at a maximum of 4 years, but I will do a 10-year study. And I will use different measurements of their diet through my own food frequency questionnaire that I created. That will be given out every 5 years, first at baseline, then 5 years later, and then at the end of the 10-year study. My participants will be selected based on stratified sampling. It would be 250 males, 250 females, and they're all aged 55 to 60 with no cognitive impairment. It's important that there's no cognitive impairment. That way we know at the baseline if there's any difference between the baseline and when they're tested 10 years later to see if the diet may have an effect on that. So like I said, the dietary assessment will be conducted through a food frequency questionnaire that will reflect how well the participants followed the Mediterranean diet, and they'll be assessed by professionals that will give them a score of 0 to 20 on each food frequency questionnaire. And then cognitive function will be assessed with a mini mental state examination. This measures orientation, registration, attention and calculation, their ability to recall, and how well they can speak their language. And a score of less than 23 on this would indicate cognitive impairment. It's on a scale of 0 to 30. And the cognitive function assessment, the mini mental state examination, is what I'll be using to essentially see if these participants have developed Alzheimer's disease. Although there's no one single test that can be used to diagnose Alzheimer's disease, this one is widely accepted as one of them. Participants really should be, they should be, to totally determine that they have Alzheimer's disease, they need to be examined by a physician that looks at a variety of different things. They can do MRIs to see any decaying to the brain. But for this particular study, I will essentially be measuring cognitive function. And after these studies are, after the tests are completed by each participant, they'll be grouped up based on their adherence to the Mediterranean diet, with group 1 being about 0 to 25%, group 2 being 25 to 50%, group 3 being 51% to 75%, and group 4 being 76% to 100%. So from my results, only 268 participants completed the study. It's 120 males and 148 females. They were all aged in between 65 and 70 years old. And I was able to compare the means between each group. Group 1 had an average MMSE score of 20.46. Group 2 was 23.28. Group 3 was 25.34. And group 4 was 25.82. From this, you can see that just right off the bat, you can see that as someone were to adhere to the Mediterranean diet more, they have a higher score on the mini mental state exam. And through my analysis, I completed a one-way ANOVA that did find the results to be significant with a p-value of less than 0.001 and a F value of 62.324. Although the results, the means between each category weren't super high, they were still found to be statistically significant. The biggest difference in the means that I was able to observe is between group 1 and group 2. Group 1 is on average considered to be mentally impaired or cognitively impaired, while group 2 is still considered to be above 23. So they aren't considered to, on average, be mentally or cognitively impaired, but there's definitely a huge difference between those two results. Also, between group 2 and group 3 is over 2 points on that examination, which is also significant. So to conclude the research, this study was able to find statistically significant results on the adherence to the Mediterranean diet and cognitive function. And like I mentioned before, my study is actually measuring cognitive function, as it can be used to diagnose Alzheimer's disease, but it does not explicitly do that. So this study did not directly measure the development of Alzheimer's disease, but it definitely points in the direction of that as a test that I used to measure cognitive function is widely accepted in the diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. This study had similar results to several other statistically significant studies, which all combine to further suggest that a higher adherence to the Mediterranean diet may help prevent Alzheimer's disease. Thank you so much.